So thanks for joining us today on the podcast. We have Ryan Price. Really excited to have you. Thanks for coming. If you could just introduce yourself, talk a little bit about your background and what you're doing with the MBA Secrets podcast, that would be awesome.
Thank you so much, Taylor, for having me. Like you said, my name is Ryan Price. I was born and raised here in Salt Lake City, Utah. I started a new podcast called MBA Secrets that the initial idea was to document my day in the life as an MBA student. And I'm also interviewing students from all over the world about their business school experiences. And so far it's going really well. So I'm excited to talk about it.
Nice. And so you mentioned that you just applied to BYU's MBA program. So, assuming that you don't have a ton of free time, you're juggling this and the podcast. What sort of inspired you to create the podcast, and what were you looking to get out of it when you thought of that?
I applied to BYU last year, and I got in last year. Because of COVID and everything, they had to defer me for a whole year. During my application process, I found that the best advice that I got, the best insights, and I guess if you want to call them secrets, that's what I call them, that I received was from actual students. When I received that advice, I used it in my interview, in my essay, and all of these different things. By far, that was the stuff that made it possible for me to get accepted. I consider myself to be a very average person. I'm not these top tier kinds of students, but having that information, I can point to several different instances, like in my interview for business school, where what they said saved me, where otherwise I would have been just totally clueless on some of the questions that they asked. After they deferred me, I was sitting there kind of just thinking, well, what now? I don't, I was expecting to go to school this year, and now here I am. My wife is working, and I can't just be here, twiddling my thumbs and doing nothing and not helping her out. So I thought back to my application process and realized, you know what, this is something that I think a lot of people could really use. And if it was helpful for me, why wouldn't it be helpful for other people? So I figured I'd pay it forward and create this podcast.
That's so awesome. So where were you finding this information before you developed the podcast? And you mentioned you found great advice online and things. What were you looking for, and where were you finding that?
I found, I don't know, just what everybody else does, right? I would Google, how do I apply for business school? And what's the best way to write your essays and all of these things. And of course, there's good information out there when you Google those things. But again, what I did was eventually just cold messaged people on LinkedIn that were business school students who had done what I was trying to do. And I figured, these people probably know better than anybody else. Even dedicated businesses that are there for MBA students as resources, they're great. They're fantastic. Obviously, you should use them. I figured you should also supplement that with people who have done what you're trying to do. And that's what I did. I reached out, scheduled phone calls with them, kind of exactly like what I'm doing with this podcast. I just reach out to people willy-nilly, just Google, hey, I don't know, Duke MBA or Oxford MBA, and go through this list of people and message them. Some of them reach back and say that they'd be willing, and we have a conversation. And so that's what I'm trying to share with people. And I think it's really valuable stuff.
Nice. And so you really just you're cold calling essentially people around the world at different business schools, asking if they would be willing to talk to you. And I'm sure you've had really fascinating conversations with people of diverse backgrounds and interesting stories. Do you have any specific kind of details about the best interviews you've had, or great advice that students have given that you wish you would have known when you were applying for an MBA?
First one that comes to mind here is, her name is Allie Lyons. She's a student at Oxford. She's actually the very first person that I interviewed, and she was awesome. And I call her up, and I am expecting, British girl who I don't know, blows me out of the water in terms of academic and professional excellence and all of these things. And she did, to be fair. She's very, very smart. The thing that she mentioned was that a relatively low GMAT score. And I just was shocked because she's attending Oxford, right? And it was something that I resonated with because I didn't kill the GMAT. I did fine. That was something that I was glad to hear. And I think that anybody who listens is glad to hear, because it's not an easy thing to do. Another one that comes to mind is Jesse Wilkinson, who attends the University of Virginia. He's actually my most recent interview as of this recording. And he's the very first in his family to even go to get a bachelor's degree, let alone a business degree. And so he had all kinds of, incredible insights, and his undergraduate degree was in linguistics. He took one business class, and it was marketing 101. So he knew nothing about business. And yet here he is attending just a top tier school. And then the third one that comes to mind is Dia Wong, who he attends ESADE in Spain. His wife is into fashion. That's kind of her industry and her career. Within Asade, they have different clubs, and one of them is the fashion club. And he told me that he joined the fashion club there at school just so that he could have more meaningful conversations with his wife. And I thought, wow, you're juggling all these different things with school, and you find time to join the fashion club just so you can have better conversation with your wife. And I thought that was awesome. And so just all these different people have we're all doing a similar thing, right? And going to business school, but we all have unique backgrounds, experiences. And I think the biggest thing I've learned is that we're all pretty similar, even if we're, whether we're at Harvard or, me at BYU, we're pretty similar. And that's, I don't know, for lack of a better word, kind of comforting.
Yeah. And I love what you said, circling back to your earlier point about these students, at Oxford and these really acclaimed schools who didn't score perfectly on the GMAT. I think that's something that's really important for us to communicate, to our listeners too, is that you don't need to get an absolutely perfect score on every exam to get into the schools you want. And if you can tell your personal story in a way that resonates with whoever's reviewing your application, that's really what matters. So kind of on that note, have you heard specific advice from students on how they have kind of let their personal story shine, or in light of not getting a perfect exam score, what their strategy has been to make themselves stand out?
And the thing that comes to mind first is Ali Lyons. She said, one of the things that she said that stuck out to me was, I'm never going to out quant the quant people, right? I'm never going to perform better in the math section than them. I'm not going to waste my time trying to. So she really focused on improving her writing assessment, her integrated reasoning, and her verbal sections. And that ultimately pushed her over the top in terms of GMAT score. The other piece of advice that I also received and that I've heard kind of come up several times is learn how to tell your story in a way that's impactful and meaningful, because it's not that you have a less impactful story. Everybody's got a great story. They just need to learn how to tell it. And that's what admission committees are looking for, is just that good story. If you feel like, I just came up and I got my bachelor's degree. I've worked at one place for the last 4 or 5 years, and now I'm applying to business school. That's true for tons and tons of people that got into business school. They just were able to tell it differently. And so that's one thing that I would say for people to focus on.
And so for you personally, not to get too into the weeds about personal details, but I know you applied to BYU and got in, and super exciting that you'll be attending BYU soon. What did you use to tell your personal story? Was there any kind of excerpt from your past or something that you pulled on that helped you think, that helps you get in ultimately?
My experience was kind of wild. And that was honestly helpful for me, because the more people can remember you, the better, right? The admission committee. And I was working in England, working for a company on an incredible career trajectory, and really kind of, most people would look at me and be like, you're a dummy for leaving and coming back and pursuing school. And I, to be honest with you, was in that same boat at that time. I hadn't even finished my undergraduate degree. All of a sudden, BYU is a religious school, and I believe in God and personal revelation, and that he cares about us. And I was sitting in a McDonald's during lunch one day in Slough, England, and I just had the thought, you need to get an MBA specifically from BYU. That was what came to me. And I was like, I don't really want to do that. I'm over here making great money doing, really cool things. And it just wouldn't go away. So I emailed the recruiting director at BYU and kind of gave him the rundown of where I was at. And he's like, yeah, if you can finish up your undergraduate degree, you've got good work experience, and you could, this is a feasible thing, which I was shocked was even real. So I came home and finished 24 credits of my undergraduate degree in one semester, and took the GMAT 6 times and did all of these things. So you can only take it 5 times in a calendar year, but I took it 6 because of COVID. They let us take 1 more. And so there was just a lot to it. And honestly, just telling that story and showing the persistence and the effort and the dedication, I think is what put me over the edge. So, not everybody's going to be coming home from England or taking the GMAT 6 times. And I hope you don't have to go through that if you're listening to this, but you still have, you're a hard worker. You've gone through a lot of things to get to this point. That's what you should share. They want to see that. They want to see somebody who's really dedicated and wants to be there.
Speaking of that, so 2021 is supposed to be one of the most competitive years for MBAs. a lot of people who weren't planning on applying to business school are now because of COVID. Right. It's extremely competitive year. Next year will be as well. What advice would you give? I know you mentioned, standing out by telling your personal story. Are there any other pieces of advice that you could offer students who are just needing to get that competitive advantage?
First off, I would say focus on yourself, not on your competition. They're going to do what they're going to do. They're going to be who they're going to be, and they're going to be good competition for you. And you should look at that as a positive thing. Don't react to what they're doing. Be proactive and make sure you take your fate into your own hands, right? Go over the top. Be better. Be the best that you can be. In an episode that comes to mind, I chatted with a man named Ryan Wadge at UCLA, who's in his MBA program, and he shared some incredible insights and strategies for making sure your application is like airtight. And I would recommend anybody listening to go to that episode. It's episode 12 of MBA Secrets. But just to boil it down, he got a group of friends that were interested in business school, and they essentially just interviewed each other and they ripped each other apart and blew holes in each other's applications and just did all of these things. And I just listened to that and I was like, well, you had no chance of being rejected. Just if you go through that kind of effort, it'll work for you. And so that's kind of what I would recommend.
That's great. Another kind of thing that we try to, pull from in helping inspire students to pursue an MBA on MBA.com is highlighting really notable people who've gotten their MBA and been successful because of that. We have multiple quizzes on, which famous MBA is most like you and things like that. I'm just curious if you have an MBA, kind of someone who went through the process who inspired you personally, a celebrity or, just someone if anyone helped inspire you to make that decision.
Shaquille O'Neal comes to mind, but I don't have a chance of being like him. So, but it is cool that he did that. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. He's actually really, really smart and impressive, which, you can gather from just listening to him. But I don't think that being a NBA Finals MVP and Hall of Famer in the NBA is in the cards for me per se. But I did have one actually come to mind just now that I think I might be able to resonate a little bit better with. And his name is Clayton Christensen. He actually passed away not too long ago, but he was an undergraduate at BYU, and he went on to get his MBA at Harvard, where he also was a professor. He's written a lot of books. I think he's pretty well known in that world. And he also performed a lot of service in church callings and in different, I don't know, just areas of life, just as a person, right? And he was very successful. He was, a proponent of making money, which I think all of us in this area want to do. He's definitely an inspirational person.
It's great to hear you say that you're kind of inspired by someone who is, interested in obviously the monetary benefit of pursuing secondary education, but also just helping the community and do things that are helping people in need is always so important. And it's interesting for us to see, such an increased interest in getting an MBA to actually pursue careers that will result in social change. And it's exciting to see that people are now kind of linking or recognizing the link between business and philanthropy and business and social change. And how impactful that can be.
I don't know. Some out there might have a stigma that it's just this evil money-making game, right? And it's to make money, but I don't think that people are inherently evil and just, want to leave others high and dry. A big part of it is to, turn around and then share it, spread that wealth and lift others up. And that's exactly what I want to do with it. So yeah, just ditto to what you said. That's perfect.
And you mentioned just a lot of, great content on your podcast, MBA Secrets. Is there any other kind of content that we can expect to see from you in the coming year or just in the near future?
Everybody can certainly expect more interviews to come. In fact, this morning I set one up with a student from the University of Florida. Pretty much every time I reach out and somebody gets back to me, they're like, oh, I love this. This is something that I wish I would have had when I was applying. So
Totally.
It's really validating and couldn't agree with them more, to be honest. We've had a few listeners actually reach out and ask questions, and we've been able to answer those questions on interviews. And that's something that I'm a huge proponent of. Please email me. It's ryan@mbasecretspodcast.com. Whatever you want to hear, this is for you. I definitely benefit from it because I'm learning a lot myself, but it exists for you. So if you have anything that you want to learn about, let me know and I'll do it. Obviously, when schooling starts, I'll be shifting kind of more of my focus to the day in the life. And that includes the good and the bad. I'm not here to just, pump it up. A lot of people are trying to decide whether or not they even want to go to to business school, and I'll share some things that might make you not want to. So stay tuned for that. And then lastly here, we have a lot of supplemental resources at mbasecretspodcast.com. Go check it out. There's plenty of stuff there. It's not all related just specifically to business school. It's a lot of stuff. Everybody's definitely welcome to check that out.
Anything else before we go? Any last thing that you want to share about your podcast, about your personal life, about whatever with the audience?
I mean, first of all, thank you again for having me. It's been my pleasure. Thanks to those listening. Certainly would love to have you as part of the MBA Secrets community. Those that are trying to apply and going through that grind, it is absolutely a grind. It's tough. It's not easy. Just keep going, keep doing. It's worth it. And to those that are in their program, I haven't technically started, but I've learned from listening and talking to all these other students that just a time you definitely don't want to pass you by, making the absolute most of it and making personal relationships, not just business relationships, can really be a game changer. So that's really all I had. It's been a lot of fun, my pleasure, and thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. Just want to shout out again, MBA Secrets Podcast. If anyone wants to email you to be on the podcast or to ask questions, it's Ryan at mbasecretspodcast.com and mba.com for any business school related advice and lots of content on your application and how to stand out in this very competitive year. Thanks so much, Ryan, for your time and for everything. You've been a great first podcast guest.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much. Bye.